The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
It's the Best Birth Podcast, where we interview experts that elevate you as you prepare your heart and mind to have the best birth.
Each episode will interview professionals so you are prepared for pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Our experts will build your confidence and empower you to trust your intuition throughout your pregnancy.
This audio is taken from videos on YouTube. Watch the entire episodes on YouTube at Birth Made Mindful. You're listening to the Best Birth Podcast. We're here today with our expert, Janelle Mellor. She's a registered nurse working in the postpartum unit, and we're so excited to find out everything we need to know about the time after delivering our baby.
Janelle was born and raised in Salt Lake, and she's been working in healthcare for over 10 years. She has a bachelor's degree in human development and family studies from the University of Utah and a bachelor's in nursing from Roseman University. She's been a maternal and newborn nurse for over 2 years now, and she loves it. So grateful to have you here.
Thank you. We'd like to just kind of find out a little bit what led you to be a healthcare worker, and if there was anything in your own life that led you to want to be in the maternal units.
Honestly, ever since high school, that was my dream job, was being in women's health. Originally, I wanted to be, BGYN, and then I just decided to be a nurse. It took me a little bit to get there. My husband, he joined the Air Force, and so I wasn't able to go to schooling right away. So then I got my first bachelor's degree in human development, and I learned a lot from that. And then once my husband got out of the military, I was able to go back to school to become a nurse. But while I was in North Dakota, that was our first station in the military. That's when I had my daughter, and it was in North Dakota, and we were super excited to have her. It wasn't really planned as I had hoped, right? I ended up having a C-section. So what had happened was I actually was over. So I was trying to go all natural. I had a doula, everything. I was actually planning on having no epidural, going completely natural. And I made it all the way to a 10. Well, okay, I made it to a 9. And then they had to end up giving me a little bit of Pitocin. I ended up getting to a 10, dilated to 10. Then I was able to start pushing. I pushed for 3 hours and nothing. She was not coming out. Finally, the doctor came in, he examined me, and he's like, you know what? I recommend having a C-section. And I was devastated. I had not planned for this. I had planned, to go natural. And so that was heartbroken. I was literally heartbroken. But at the same time, I was like, I need this baby out. Because the pain it's really intense. It's really an awful, what they say. It's so intense. It's really the most painful experience you can have. And so at that time, I don't care. Yeah, I'll have a C-section. And then once I had a C-section and I saw my baby, I was just so relieved and I was so excited. And everything after that was beautiful. It was amazing. But we did find out that she was 10 pounds, 1 ounce. Then again, she was almost 42 weeks too. I was measuring big when I did have an ultrasound when I was 36 weeks, and they did mention I was measuring big. So that was a concern, but nothing else. Everything else in my pregnancy went smoothly. So just the fact that I was over was the big concern. And then also, you probably heard of Sunnyside. So she was occipital posterior. So she wasn't quite the right position that we like them in. When I was 40 weeks with her, I tried to do everything I could to try to move her because I had thought that maybe she was in the wrong spot. And she was stubborn and just did not budge at all. She came out healthy, and I recovered, honestly, pretty rapidly, I thought.
Mm.
Wow. And then, so that's one of the reasons also why I wanted to go into women's, especially labor delivery or postpartum. I was interested in any all of those fields. And so when I applied to the University of Utah, I actually got that job, and it felt right. I felt home. The best thing that I love about my job is to educate. It's just amazing just to be with those new moms or just moms, and just to be there as a comfort, especially when they've gone through the same thing, that, it's not their ideal birth story, right? To have a C-section, or if they had complications, but it's just nice to be like, I've been in those shoes. I know exactly how you're feeling, or close to it, right? And it's just like a nice comfort, just to be there and help them out. So I actually tried to go for a VBAC, and this was after I was a nurse. So I had kind of prepared for it a little bit more. I ended up getting an epidural, though, because I did not want to experience that pain. And I had pushed, and I had pushed for about 2 hours, and I couldn't handle it anymore. I was like, I still feel this pain. Like, I don't think my epidural's really working. Come to find out, like, his heart rate was kind of dropping. So they're like, you know what? We need to have an emergency C-section. Like, he can't handle these contractions anymore. And I was really exhausted at that point. I was hurting. And they took me back to do a C-section. I found out my uterus had ruptured. So kind of scary, and a blessing in disguise was that I ended up having, C-section. And that's actually one of a few signs of a uterine rupture, is the baby's heart rate will go down. And also you'll have intense pain. So even though you have an epidural or pain meds, right, you're still going to feel that pain. But he came out healthy. One thing, though, to note, and this is what I will actually be talking about too, is gestational diabetes. I actually ended up having gestational diabetes with my son. Surprisingly, not with my first, but with my son, I did end up having that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But he was not as big as my first. I will say that. He was only 7 pounds. Let's see, 7'11". Yep. So 7 pounds, 11 ounces. Yeah.
Before we leave your birth stories, how do you feel you coped with the change in plans? Because you had expected to give birth vaginally and then had the C-sections.
Yeah. I think I was a little bit more prepared for the possibility of having a C-section. And, my provider, my doctor, had mentioned that too, that there could be a good chance of having a C-section, especially knowing that at my first I had a C-section. She was a little bit bigger of a baby. There's a few other signs that, could lead me in that direction. And so I was a little bit more prepared and opened for that thought. So I think that really helped me emotionally be like, okay, we're having an emergency C-section. I'm okay with that because I know what to prepare. And I think because I had already recovered from a C-section, I don't think I really mind having another C-section because I know I already have that scar. I know, what I have to do to heal. So I think that helped a lot.
Let's dive into some questions about preparing for births and why there are all these checks that the nurses do. I'm sure you're involved with many of those checks every day. And what is the purpose of making sure mom is okay and baby's okay?
Even if like a healthy mom delivers, there could still be complications that can arise. One of the biggest things that we're worried about is a hemorrhage. And so that's why we do those fundal checks where, the lady will, the nurse will come on your belly and really push, like almost as if she's trying to touch your spine. But that's really just to check your uterus and make sure it's doing its job, that it's firm, that it's not called boggy. Because if it's boggy, you're more risk for a hemorrhage. So it's a muscle. It needs to be firm. It should be actually contracting slowly back down. So the next few weeks, it'll go back down to its like pre-pregnancy state, right? So it's a good thing if it's contracting, if it's nice and firm. And then we also check bleeding too. So we'll just make sure that your bleeding's, where it's supposed to be and nothing too heavy. Now, if we're seeing like a pad full of blood and it's saturated, we're going to be what's called cradane your uterus more, really trying to get that uterus muscle to firm back up and do its job.
I remember with my first, I wasn't expecting to have to use the spray bottle every time you go to the bathroom. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. The spray bottle, so that's mainly just to make sure you're clean, right? But it also can help, especially if you tore really close to your urethra, that's going to help with the pain. So oftentimes if I say, if you have a tear right there close to it, use that, the bottle to spray right there while you're going peeing, because that's going to help. If not, sometimes it can feel, you can feel that burning sensation when you pee. So using that spray bottle helps. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the procedures that will take place postpartum. When we are doing our prenatal visits, what is the purpose of taking our blood pressure each visit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, the providers are looking for what's called preeclampsia, or even just gestational hypertension or high blood pressure in pregnancy. And it seems to be more common. I'll see a lot more patients, that come in with that. Gestational hypertension, it is related to gestational hypertension or pre-E. Okay. So preeclampsia, it's a hypertension, a high blood pressure related disorder. So what happens is you get high blood pressure. So there's the other symptoms that can occur. So you have high blood pressure, you have protein in your urine. So if you have protein in your urine, you automatically have pre-E. Now there's different levels of pre-E. So there's pre-E where it's just more of a mild without severe features, and then there's some that have severe features. So the ones that, like a mild case of pre-E would be preeclampsia, would be like a blood pressure of 140 over 90, and then maybe a trace of like protein. But let's just say you're not having any other different signs or symptoms, and you'd have just like a mild case of it. Now, anyone who has just gestational hypertension can develop preeclampsia, right? If they develop like protein in the urine, if they have any other signs or symptoms. And some of those signs or symptoms is like a headache, blurry vision, dizziness, maybe your face is swelling, hands swelling. So all those signs could be preeclampsia.
And what is the course of action if they find that you do have preeclampsia?
Yeah. So, and severe preeclampsia is a blood pressure of 160 over 110. So, and they'll diagnose that if you have two blood pressures within, let's say, 4 hours of each other, and it's that high with all those other symptoms. So the course of action would be, they put you on like labetalol or nifedipine. It's a blood pressure medication. Try to get your blood pressure down. Let's say you're close to delivery, they'll probably just deliver you. They'll just have a medical induction for you, just because that's really scary. Because if it's not treated, what can happen is you're at risk for like a seizure, because that's what eclampsia is. That's the medical term, is a seizure. So you're trying to prevent a seizure from happening. A stroke can happen too. You can also have, hurt your organs, right? You can have like kidney, dysfunctions. Like,
Is that where help comes in?
they definitely deliver your baby for sure.
I always forget what HELP stands for, but I know that it is the more
yeah.
serious stage of preeclampsia.
That is definitely when your organs are more in danger. Your doctor would do some labs, kind of see where all your organs functioning, and then they would definitely deliver your baby most likely right away.
Yeah, we're so
Possible.
grateful to have providers that take such great care of us and check our blood pressure. It's almost like all of these things behind the scene, but there's really important reasons why they're taking all of this data and they're measuring how our body's functioning, how our baby's functioning. if you are experiencing any of these symptoms later on in your pregnancy, don't be silent, right? Like call your provider and just let them know what you're experiencing. And then they can let you know if you should come in, if you should continue monitoring at home, or if it's more urgent. Sometimes they'll even send you straight to the ER if you report that you're having those headaches, blurry vision, lots of swelling, because you and your baby could be at risk.
You could still develop hypertension or preeclampsia even postpartum too.
Mm.
And that usually happens about 48 hours after delivery and on. So let's say you're at home, you can totally have high blood pressure and have these signs and symptoms and not realize that, oh, that's possibly preeclampsia. You have a headache. And then if you have a blood pressure at home, definitely check your blood pressure because you never know.
It's good that you bring up that it could happen after pregnancy. I didn't realize that it could. Are there other reasons for the checks after birth? What else are they looking for when they're checking your vitals?
It's possible that you could have a low blood pressure due to like a loss of a lot of blood, right? Knowing that you delivered. And so making sure that, you're getting your blood count back up and stuff too. That's really important. Making sure just your overall well-being, that, emotionally you're being okay with a new baby, right? A lot of changes. So I think it's just mainly making sure, how you're functioning, making sure, you don't have any other signs, symptoms. You're pretty much back, from after having a baby, right?
You touched a little bit about gestational diabetes.
Okay.
Can you let us know what the test is that they will check to see if you have the gestational diabetes?
I remember before my first just hearing, oh yeah, you'll just go drink that drink. That's what I always heard.
So if you have a risk of like gestational diabetes, okay, so they'll consider all your different risk factors. Okay, so if you're, obese, so if you're overweight, if let's say you have someone in your family that has diabetes, you've had a bigger baby like me that was 9 pounds or bigger, you're more risk for gestational diabetes, right? So I had a lot of these risk factors and I didn't realize it. And so my provider I was 11 weeks, I had gotten tested. I was like, there's no way I have gestational diabetes already. Because they usually test that, I would say about 20 weeks. So later on. But sure enough, it came up positive. And so you take this drink, this oral drink, and so you get a fasting. You get a fasting just to check your blood sugar. And then you take the oral drink, and then then they see what it is in an hour. And so then they see if it's elevated or if it went down. If it's elevated, then you actually have to come back for a 3-hour test to actually see, okay, do you actually have gestational diabetes? And then within that 3 hours, if you don't pass it, if it's still really elevated, then you would have gestational diabetes. And so that's what happened to me. And so, yeah, it can happen early on. So if you have risk factors, you might be tested early on. But generally, it's 20 weeks.
And so then how did you manage your insulin during that pregnancy?
Not everyone actually takes insulin. So it can be managed by just regular diet and exercise. So what we typically do is so when you wake up in the morning, you check your blood sugar. So you make a plan and you check it in the morning for fasting. So right when you wake up, you check your blood sugar. And then every time after you eat, you actually check your blood sugar. And so an ideal blood sugar, excuse me, is for the morning is under 95. And then after you eat 2 hours, it should be under 120. But if you check it within an hour, it could be up to 140. And so as long as you're let's say you're fasting and as long as your other ones are under that, the 140 or 120, then you're okay. You don't need to take insulin. You don't need to take metformin. However, if it's consistently going over, let's say it's, 130, after 2 hours, then you might need to be put on insulin or metformin. For me, I was always okay after my 2 hours. I was able to usually carb count, look at what I'm eating, manage it that way. The struggle for me was always my fasting. So always my fasting was like, I don't know, like 110, 115, something like that. And so they did put me on insulin. It was a long acting insulin. And that seemed to help a lot. Eventually, when I got closer to delivery, right, it gets higher. Your blood sugar ends up getting higher, right? Because your placenta produces hormones, right? And it gets bigger and bigger, right? And produces more hormones as we get closer to delivery. And so it gets a lot more challenging to control it when you get closer. And so it's possible by that time, you could be on insulin or metformin. So, yeah.
Hmm. And I've heard that research is you can't really prevent diabetes, but you can help it with diet and exercise. Is that the case with gestational diabetes as well?
What are you eating, right? Carb counting, right? Kind of watching your carbs and then definitely exercising. With gestational diabetes, it's actually based on more your placenta. Right. So your placenta, produces those hormones. And it's kind of like it's overcasting, the insulin. Like it's like blocking like the insulin from working. And normally our pancreas can produce more insulin so that we don't have that problem, right? Because we know that we need insulin for our blood sugar to go down, right? So that the glucose can go into our cells, right? Like the doorkeeper, right? Let's the sugar in, right? The glucose in. But yeah, in gestational diabetes, it's it it's like it's like it doesn't recognize the insulin, like the cells, like it just like inhibits it. Um, or your pancreas just can't make as much. So it's mainly definitely due to your placenta and the hormones and that. And it's funny because I actually see healthy, ladies who are pregnant and have gestational diabetes. So it has nothing to do with like, oh man, you're eating too much sugar. It has really nothing to do necessarily with that. So
And will it continue to affect you after pregnancy, or does it typically manage itself?
yeah, so after you deliver, it's like you're pretty much cured, right? It's like you don't have gestational diabetes anymore, but you are actually at risk for developing diabetes in the long run. So that's one thing just to, watch out for. Yeah.
My mom has diabetes, so we've always had that on our radar. I had to take the 3-hour test for all 3 of my children, but never was actually diagnosed with diabetes. So I think it's just in my risk factors. But my mom also works in the mother-baby unit at the hospital. She's a CNA. Do you work with the babies as well, or just the moms?
Oh yeah, I work with
Babies
both.
too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so fun. I love my job. It's so rewarding. It's so fun. Just to help educate those moms with the little babies, how to breastfeed. I think that's definitely one of my favorite parts is actually helping with breastfeeding.
And then checking babies' vitals. Do you check those as well?
Oh yeah.
And what are they looking for with babies' vitals?
Yeah, so we're just checking, making sure they're in a healthy range. Like for a heart rate, it should be between 110 and 160. Same thing with respirations, about between 30 and 60. And then a good temperature too. Ain't nothing where it's gonna be elevated like a fever or anything like that.
I remember they gave us a sleep sack for my oldest son, and he was born in the summer, but we put him in this fleece sleep sack, and they're like, oh, he's too hot. Well, you gave it to us, so we were putting it in him. But I feel like baby's temperature, it's a little hard to regulate because they're so new to the world and learning all of those things.
And generally, you're right. I mean, you want to keep them warm because they're more likely to get cold, especially if you have a preterm baby. Like that baby's gonna get cold a lot easier than a baby that's term, right? Or has some, who's a little bit bigger, right? Bigger baby. So that's definitely something, to think about. But I think it could have been also if it's like a fluffy blanket or something. I think we're more worried of like, oh, it could cover, that baby's face or no. What I normally tell, my patients is to put at least 2 layers of clothing. So I'll swaddle like 2 blankets on on the baby, and then make sure their hat is on, because a lot of their heat can just escape from their head. So just having that kept, pretty important the first few weeks while that baby kind of regulates and getting used to definitely being in the world, right?
One beautiful element I learned is that the mother continues to regulate the temperature and oxygen levels of the baby even after the baby is born. And so if you can just keep that baby close to you, if you can do a lot of skin to skin time, then your baby will have an easier transition from the womb to the world.
Definitely, and also not only temperature regulation, so doing skin to skin, but also blood sugar regulation. So because I had gestational diabetes, and I tell this to all my moms who have gestational diabetes, because those babies are at risk of having hypoglycemia or having low blood sugar, because they're so used to getting all that sugar, all that, all that in their systems. And so when they're born, it's like, okay, well, now we actually have to feed them. They're not getting that constant supply of nourishment, right? And so that baby can be a little risk for that. So I say, put that baby skin to skin, because that's going to really help that blood sugar regulation and temperature regulation.
Are there any other pieces of advice that you would give to a new mom in caring for her baby?
Doing lots of skin to skin. We already just talked about that. I would say, feed your baby every 2 to 3 hours. And just enjoy that time, because it just goes so fast. When I was breastfeeding my baby, it seems like it goes like you're just constantly breastfeeding your baby, but really enjoy it, because it's such a special experience, just being able to have that bonding time, that sacred time that you get with your baby, breastfeeding and getting to know your baby and getting all those love and snuggles. It's seriously the best time, literally, in your life, I feel like.
There's a trend to show the scrunch, the newborn scrunch, as you lift a baby out of their car seat or out of their crib, and how they just keep their little bum close, because that's how they've been resting in the womb. And that's such a sweet thing to remember, just to treasure that time when they're so tiny.
And that you get to witness all of these babies coming into the world and all of those firsts. One of my mom's favorite thing is to give the babies their first bath in the hospital. So that's an exciting time too. Every week we share a Mom Squad secret from someone in our community. And this week it's from Deb. And she says, alleviate morning sickness at night by taking Unisom and vitamin B6. Are there any other tips you have for alleviating morning sickness?
We always recommend staying in bed and having someone grab you crackers, or if you can remember the night before, having crackers at your bedside, because as soon as you get up, you feel sick, right? You start moving around, and just have a little bit of crackers just helps. And then they also say eating more frequently, but less will definitely help with that too. Ginger always helps. I always had ginger candies. Yeah, those really help.
Janelle, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for coming on, teaching us all about the intricacies of our prenatal and postnatal visits. This has been a treasure. Are there any other resources that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Feel free to always call the clinic. So if you have any questions, concerns with anything, nurses are there to help support you, to, answer any questions, concerns you have. Know your resources. So if you ever need help with breastfeeding, there is lactation support outpatient too, that guarding formula stuff. There are programs out there with WIC and stuff. So please reach out.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. We hope you've been elevated and inspired by this week's expert.
Subscribe today so you never miss an episode. And please share our podcast or post on your social media so that other moms and dads-to-be can also have the best birth.
Please note that the information provided is based on the expert's insights and personal experience. It is not intended as medical guidance. Please seek the advice of your medical provider as it applies to your specific condition.